So, any other thoughts on Vieira? I want you to keep in mind this. I think this is a good set of ideas to keep in mind because it comes up. It's a theme running through most of the movies. And the one final thing I would point out with Vieira is the idea that you don't see your predator, and in some ways this is a gunpowder effect. Because gunpowder, essentially, I mean, we saw it with the bows and arrows and crossbows in the Middle Ages, but by the 20th century, you've got high explosive artillery shells that can kill people from 30 miles away, and you have, guns that can shoot, 400 yards, and, you have poison gas, which can be, launched from anywhere and be lurking in a low depression in the ground, and you won't even know it's there. And so death is invisible, and this is a key idea because it makes it much harder to challenge somebody and go face to face, hand to hand, if you can't even see them. But I think that's in some sense a gunpowder effect or an airplane effect, an industrialization effect, right? Kylie was first, and then we'll list on the objections.
Yeah, and the one time Paul had a breakdown was when he was face to face with the guy and stabbed.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. Is that he does finally get hand-to-hand, one-on-one combat, and he can't face it, right? Because that suddenly turns prey into opponent, right? And you're not supposed to kill your opponent. Listen.
Also, like, the predators couldn't even see the prey. It's just like one man shot across the field to like whoever's manning the machine guns, and just like, basically mow them down before they get to our trench.
Yeah.
It's like they don't even see the faces. They don't even think like, all right, who is this person?
Yeah.
It's just like, keep them away, shoot them.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, All Quiet on the Western Front really captures like you barely ever see like the French, like a French soldier, French people, and like when you do, it's like these big mass waves of people where none of like so unspecific, like it's just like big shots of huge waves of people. You don't know one from the other. And then like Kylie said, like the one time he becomes face to face with his enemy and like there's with two humans, his sense of honor, it's like it's troublesome to him that like, because how he attacked him was kind of predatory. Like he grabbed him as he was jumping over and just stabbed him like he was prepared for him, and like the fight was over, and then he like was like, well, there's no honor in me just sitting here and watching this man die for no reason.
Right. Yeah. The one exception is the three French women. That's a totally different story.
In that scene, he has a really great line where he says, "But you're just a man like me, and I forgive you." I thought that was amazing to put right there. And just a question: is the Korean War considered a 20th century war?
Yes, absolutely.
And then I wonder why he didn't include it.
Because, oddly enough, there is not much literature. He's really focused on war literature.
Yeah.
World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War produced a lot of fiction written by veterans trying to explain the experience. Yeah. And for some reason, I do not know, the Korean War didn't.
Is it because
it's really just living up to the forgotten war?
Yeah, in a way, it really is a forgotten war. But
is it because it was like there was like two? It was like sandwiched in between two much more like kind of shock and awe major wars, or
that's a good question, and I'm not entirely sure. First of all, I want to correct you all. It was not a war; it was a police action. But
Which one, Vietnam or Korea?
Yeah. Korea was technically a UN police action, and technically the United States was not a combatant. It was a UN member who was supporting the UN effort. Yeah.
My great uncle certainly has a hat that says he was a Korean War veteran.
Yeah, I know. I'm being facetious.
Where did they make those?
He definitely went on an honor flight to the Korean War Memorial.
Yeah, and my dad only avoided the Korean War because he was in graduate school. They gave him an exemption. So anyway, any thoughts on Vieira? Any other thoughts? I think it's worth just keeping this in mind, this idea of predation versus honorable interspecies combat for dominance, because it does come up. We're going to see it. We're going to read the Drieu La Rochelle novella. He's a World War I veteran, and he explicitly takes up exactly that idea. And he calls the war a failure because you couldn't do that. And we'll see where that goes. But any final thoughts on Vieira or?
I was just wondering, like, is there like literature about like the Gulf Wars or like?
There are some movies
movies.
like Jarhead and Three Kings, so there are some movies, but I am not aware of. Let me think. I don't think I've come across any memoirs, but I haven't really been looking either, so it doesn't mean there aren't any. I'm not aware of any memoirs by World War One.
Yeah.
I mean, Persian Gulf War veterans. I did have an interesting conversation with two of them. I was in graduate school at Penn State. Two of them were getting master's degrees in military history because Penn State's really strong in that. They were tank commanders in the Persian Gulf War, and they basically were almost. I don't want to say this is overstating it slightly, but they were almost embarrassed because American tanks were so much better than Iraqi tanks that it wasn't even a fair fight. And which sort of goes exactly to what we're talking about, was that they were like, this wasn't a fair fight. This was,
there's not a sense that you're like having like a sporting combat with an enemy.
Yeah.
It's just like,
yeah,
we're just tearing through these people.
right, exactly. And also the American tank sighting systems were so good that the American tanks could identify Iraqi tanks over the horizon and fire at them without seeing them, whereas the Iraqis didn't even know the Americans were there.
That's crazy.
So it was nuts.
The Iraqis were running like old Soviet tanks.
Yeah, it was all Soviet tanks, and they were good tanks, but the Americans had the next generation, which was all computer assisted with satellite targeting systems, and it was just like, oh my gosh, this isn't even close. But yeah, so there was a definite sense it was not a fair fight, and the guys I talked to were not, they were not apologizing for it or anything. They were just sort of like, well, it wasn't, Any other thoughts on Vieira or All Quiet on the Western Front? All right, so let me talk about, World War One. Why don't I talk about that?
You love World War One.
I love World War One.
Well, might be a better way to put it.
Love always involves pain, right? So, I mean, we've got 2 days here, and we haven't, I made you watch the whole All Quiet on the Western Front, and I didn't explain what the heck the war was about, so I'm going to explain what the war is about.
You get a map.
Got a map?
It's
I know you guys, I'm not even going to draw it on the board, I'm going to just show you a map.
Oh, your drawings of the continents are so good, though. I don't know how you do it. You actually get them pretty accurate, remember?
Yeah.
Well, I picked a topic where I'm drawing blobs.
Yeah.
and everybody is like interpreting those blobs because they want to see France there. So all I got to do is come in to the right, and you're like, yeah, that's France. Especially Italy. I mean, you draw a boot, and they're like, oh, Italy.
Yeah.
This is no general shape.
So if I had to actually draw the faces of the generals in World War I, you'd be going, God, he sucks. But drawing countries, I'm good at it. Okay, so World War I. Some of you have heard this before, obviously, because you've had me in other classes, but you're going to get it again in slightly different form. Basically, World War I was an accident. It was not supposed to happen, and in fact, it was the result of a set of alliances that were intended to prevent a war. The alliances were basically this, that throughout the late 19th century, there were three big major powers in Europe. Britain, which built up an enormous empire all over the world over the course of the 19th century. They conquered India, they conquered huge swaths of Africa, they conquered swaths of Asia, and the islands of the Pacific. France, which conquered the other half of Africa that England didn't take, and chunks of Asia, etc. And then Russia. And Russia's empire was actually not an overseas colonial empire. Russia simply expanded east. That Russia, as a European country is basically here, but it extends 6,000 miles that way, and Russia basically just expanded across northern Asia all the way to, above Korea. Over the 1600s and 1700s, that was Russia's empire. So they just built by expansion. But those three were big colonial empires. They were wealthy because they were exploiting Africans or Southeast Asians or Indians or Siberians or etc. And they had big, really well-developed armies. And for a lot of the 1700s and the 1800s, there was a sort of a balance of power. There were enough countries that had enough power that they shifted around a little bit in their alliances, but there's always a balance of these guys versus those guys roughly equal. But this all gets upset beginning in the 1870s, and by the 1890s it's really upset. And the reason is that these two countries, Germany and Italy, both get united in 1871, January of 1871. And essentially, Germany before this had been about 180 little tiny principalities. Some were pretty big countries like Prussia or Bavaria. Some of them were tiny. I mean, the city of Frankfurt was an independent state, right? And so Germany was divided up, and Prussia had been an important power, but not a huge power, but it had been a significant power in the 1700s and the early 1800s. But in 1870, Prussia defeats France in a war and forces France to agree to allow Prussia to unify Germany. And so Prussia basically absorbs everybody else in Germany and makes it a single country. At the same time, Italy had been dozens of little tiny kingdoms and city-states and things like that. And Italy had been trying, the Kingdom of Sardinia and Piedmont and Sardinia in particular, had been trying to unify all of Italy. But essentially, one of the outcomes of Prussia defeating France was that diplomatically, suddenly Italy had a moment where they could unify. So they did. So Germany and Italy unified at the same times. And then Germany and Italy embark on a massive industrialization program. Both of them industrialized in the latter half of the 19th century. Before this, industrialization meant England, Belgium, Holland, France, right? Now it spreads to Germany and Italy, and because they're industrializing, 50 to 100 years later than the other powers, they essentially leapfrog the older industrial powers. France and Britain and Belgium and Holland had industrialized with textiles. They had created industrial textile factories, and then they had created some other industries related to textiles, like making power looms. Germany and Italy leapfrog that, and they take part in what's called the Second Industrial Revolution. When they industrialize, they don't industrialize producing textiles. They start producing electrical equipment, automobiles, airplanes, all these things that come along in the 1890s and early 1900s are cutting edge technologies, and Germany and Italy adopt those, which is why you don't hear too much about Peugeot and Citroën and French car companies, but you hear a lot about Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen and Fiat and etc. It's because those companies come along they jump to the forefront of their industries because their countries are industrializing right when those industries are developing. So Germany, to make a long story short, once it's unified, it becomes the second biggest country in Europe in terms of population. It's about 85 million people. Russia's about 110 million, which is bigger, but Germany is now bigger than France, it's bigger than Italy, it's bigger than the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it's bigger than England. In fact, it's bigger than France and England together. And Germany is now also a wealthy, cutting-edge, highly developed, technologically advanced, industrialized society by 1895. And so, and Italy is similar, but it's not as big, it doesn't have as much of a population, it doesn't industrialize quite as fast or as thoroughly, and so Italy is a similar, but not quite on the same scale as Germany. Any questions about that? So, the presence of Germany upsets everything in Europe, the whole power dynamics in Europe, because it had been that the Austro-Hungarian Empire and England and France and Russia and Prussia would sort of make alliances and sort of shuffle around and make sure their two teams are sort of equal. Germany is suddenly so big and so powerful, it's disrupting the whole system, right? Nobody knows how to fit an alliance around that. Well, what they do is they essentially, and let me mention two other things about Germany. One is Germany decides too late that it wants colonies. They think, oh, colonies are what make a country a great power. Britain has colonies, France has colonies, Russia has colonies, even Italy has colonies, Spain has colonies, Portugal has colonies. Germany should have colonies. And so Germany begins to become very aggressive about trying to grab the last little bits of the earth that aren't taken, but also to try to take colonies from other countries like France and England, etc. The second thing is that Germany embarks on a massive armaments project. They start building a navy to rival Britain's navy as the most powerful navy in the world, and they start building an army to challenge France as the most technologically advanced army in the world. And so they're basically challenging all of the big boys on their own territory, right? Jackson, give it. Okay. So this sets off a kind of radical reshuffling over the course of the 1890s and 1910s. And the upshot of it is that three of the great powers get so afraid of Germany that they form an alliance called the Triple Entente. The Triple Entente is originally the Double Entente. France and Russia make an alliance, and then they let Britain join it later, and it becomes the Triple Entente. Entente is just the French word for understanding. So the Triple Entente is France, Great Britain, and Russia. And I'll just point out a couple of things about that. France and Great Britain are over here. Russia's over here. Germany is in between, right? And so once this alliance is formed, it means that if Germany is going to fight a war against one of these countries, they're going to fight a war on two wars. They have to split their army in half, and half of their army fight Russia, and half of their army fight France and Great Britain, or whatever proportion they decide to do. But they can't just fight one front. Well, the Triple Entente is explicitly meant to be a deterrent. The gist of it is, it says if Germany attacks any one of us, we will all attack Germany. And the idea is just we're going to stop Germany from ever trying to attack us, because they'd be crazy to fight all three of us at once on a two-front war, so this will prevent a war. And so the Triple Entente was explicitly intended to prevent a war. Well, Germany sees the Triple Entente, which is formalized by 1908, and is terrified, and they start looking around for allies. And so Germany starts gathering up allies. And they gather together Italy, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Germany, so those become the central powers because they're in the center of Europe. Any questions about those two alliances? Zach?
The Ottomans join in later.
I'll get to that.
Okay.
And the Italians are on the wrong side at the moment.
Oh, you're right.
Did you know that the Ottoman, like the furniture Ottoman, originated in the Ottoman Empire?
That would make sense.
Did you know that the name Ottoman Empire is a European corruption of the word Osmanli? So it's supposed to be the Osmanli Empire, but they couldn't say it, so they said Ottomanli, and then they started saying Ottoman, and then they said Ottoman, and then they started calling the footstool that came from the Ottoman Empire an Ottoman. And then they found out that the cabinet of the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire was called a divan, and they all sat on couches, so they started calling couches divans. So, for some reason, the Ottoman Empire has generated two names for furniture.
They struggled with the Turkish language, apparently.
Yes. Do you have a question about that? Don't move around. Listen.
Is this what happens when you absolutely butcher the pronunciation of something?
Yes.
Well, that's really far off, kind of. Like,
Yeah.
They really butcher
Maybe
that
they just didn't have
pronunciation.
those letter sounds.
these? Asses?
Didn't know how to make that sound. I don't know.
Who knows? I don't speak enough Turkish to tell you. So, so both of these alliances are basically intended to prevent a war, because now you'd have to be absolutely crazy to start a war, because it's going to turn into 6 countries fighting each other all at once, and that's just totally out. I mean, it's not only such a huge war. Why would you start that? It's also so unpredictable. 6 different countries all fighting each other. You don't know how that's going to go. And diplomats and kings and things, they want to have a pretty good sense that they're starting a war, they're going to win it, right? And so this is just hard to predict. Any questions about that? Let me just mention that as Jackson was pointing out, once the war starts, Italy actually drops out of the Central Powers and joins the other side. Now they have the grace to take a year off in the middle, so it doesn't look like they're just dumping the one girlfriend for the other. But they
really thought about it.
basically at the start of every war, wars at this time were about conquering territory. You only went to war to conquer territory. You went to war to win stuff. Had to be worth it. And so the Italians said, "Oh, we're going to war. What do we want? What do we want out of the war?" And they realized that the only territory they wanted was in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so going to war as an ally of the Austro-Hungarian Empire would not get you what you wanted. And so they dropped out, and then a year later joined the other side so they could attack the Austro-Hungarian Empire and take their stuff.
Looking at this map, they didn't get anything they wanted, did they?
They did slightly.
Okay.
This border moved just a little bit, and Trieste in particular.
It looks like
changed.
modern Italy.
It does. There's just a tiny bit of...
They certainly didn't take over the Austro-Hungary Empire.
Right.
It was like, I'm sure they wanted all the Adriatic, but that didn't happen. Because
Yeah, no. All right, so, and then the Ottoman Empire would join in on Germany's side, largely because Germany offered them 2 battleships.
Just 2?
Just 2.
That's all it took back then, huh?
Well, basically the Ottoman Empire had put in an order from the British for their 2 dreadnought-class battleships, world-class battleships. They had ordered them, the British had built them, the Turks had school fundraisers with elementary school students trying to sell cards to raise money for these battleships. It was a national pride thing. We were going to become a real nation because we were going to have battleships.
From Britain.
From Britain. And then they sent the ships were ready, they sent the crews to England to bring the battleships home, and the war started, and England said, you know what, you can't have them. We're going to use them. And so the Turks are like, we're out 2 battleships. And then in the Mediterranean, the British actually, when the war started, a battleship group of the German Navy was in the Mediterranean. They get trapped there with a massive British naval squadron chasing them all over the Mediterranean, and they can't get away, and they got nowhere to go because you can't get out of the Mediterranean because the British control Gibraltar over here. And so they're rushing around, and they finally decide to just go to Istanbul, capital of the Ottoman Empire, and say, you're neutral, can we hide here? And the Ottomans are like, we're short 2 battleships. And the Germans are like, join the war on our side, we'll give them to you. and then the Germans, with German crews, they put on Ottoman uniforms and then sailed up to Odessa and started shelling a Russian port to start the Ottoman part of the war, but it was actually the Germans who started it.
Did the Ottomans get those 2 battleships they wanted?
They did, they got the battleships. But
However, they didn't
empire.
last. Yeah, they don't last much longer after.
Yes. The Ottoman Empire would end in 1922, but it was really over by 1918.
I still love the Ottoman. You can put your feet up on it, you can put blankets in there.
I don't know if you've ever stood outside my office door upstairs, but I have a little cartoon from the New Yorker, and it says the Ottoman Empire, and it shows a whole bunch of Turks sitting in armchairs with footstools all over the place. Any questions about the alliances? Well, I'm not going to go into all the details of the war, but it's a domino effect. I'm going to give you you don't need to know this, but essentially there's a little tiny country down here called Serbia. And there's a little tiny chunk of Austro-Hungarian Empire called Bosnia, right next to Serbia. And there's a whole bunch of Serbs who live in Bosnia. And in 1914, in June of 1914, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand, not the pop star, is assassinated by a Serb in Bosnia, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And I just found out, because my son just found this, if you go to Vienna today, they have a museum where you can actually see the clothes he was wearing when he was shot and the car he was shot in. It's sitting in the museum.
In Vienna?
Yeah, in Vienna.
That's like if we had the car JFK was shot and then the suit he was wearing in some museums.
Are you sure we don't?
I'm
I'm sure we have the car.
I'm sure we have the car. I hope we don't have the suit he was wearing.
So, but in like a completely different part of the country too.
Yeah,
Yeah, like yeah, it's like in California. There's the
yeah. Yep.
So it seems like they would try to put it in Sarajevo, but no.
Yeah, no. Well, Sarajevo's unfortunately in a different country now, so they can't do that.
They literally can't.
So anyway, this sets off a domino effect because Austria declares war on Serbia. Big deal. Austria's going to crush Serbia, no problem. Except that Serbia has a long-standing relationship with Russia, and Russia has to decide if they're going to step up to back up Serbia against the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Well, Germany realizes that if Russia steps up and backs up the Serbs against the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Russia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire are going to go to war, and that will set off the alliances, trigger the alliances, and Germany is going to have to fight France, England, and Russia all at once. And so Germany decides, if that happens, there is no way they can win a war where they're fighting both of them at the same time, both sides at the same time, so they have to have a plan. The plan is we're going to sneak attack France and knock them out of the war, and then we can throw our whole army against Russia. It's the sort
and
of...
have like a naval war against Britain, or
Well, they're hoping to actually if they can get France to surrender before Britain ever gets over there, then
Britain will say, you know what, Russia?
Yeah, exactly. And the key thing here is that France has a standing army. Every young man in France serves 3 years in the military at this point, and they have like 1.2 million soldiers in arms, in uniform, in barracks at all times. So France's army is going to be ready to go in 24 hours if a war starts. And France has what everyone considers to be the best army in the world at that point. England does not have a standing army. England has a navy, but England will have to draft soldiers and build an army. And Russia has a small standing army. They have a standing army, but it's very small. What Russia would do is draft a whole bunch of peasants who would have to walk 100 miles to the nearest recruiting station, and they'd have to train them, and etc. Russia's not going to be ready to fight for like 6 months. So the idea is, Germany basically says to the war starts, we got to knock France out right away, throw everything we have against France, and then we can go back and fight Russia later because it's going to take them a long time to get ready. And if we can knock out France before England's ready to go, they're not going to even get started. Listen.
That strategy worked out super great in World War II, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it went perfectly according to plan in World War II, and then they still lost. So, so basically, once it looks like Russia might go to war, might declare war on Austria-Hungary to back up Serbia, Germany realizes it has to attack France, and the best way to attack France in a sneak attack is not to attack France, is to go through Belgium, because the French won't expect an attack coming from Belgium. So the longest story short, once this Serb shoots Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, the Germans have to invade Belgium. Which makes no sense whatsoever, but it makes all the sense. You have another question?
More just a comment. So in World War II, Britain didn't quit.
That's true.
Like Germans didn't get that part of the plan.
Right,
They
and they did
got
expect that. That was part of their plan,
Yeah,
was that
they
Britain
just
would
got the
quit.
conquer France plan, and then Britain was basically like, screw your plan.
Well, and I wonder if in World War I it may have been different just because Germany wasn't having all of the moral issues, the same moral issues as World War II.
Mhm.
Well, they didn't have Hitler leading them, which
Yeah.
is...
Yeah.
Like-
they weren't causing a genocide.
So ultimately, and then a bunch of other countries would join in. So I'm not going to go into all of them here, but you get Greece, you get Serbia, and eventually you get the United States, and over here you get Bulgaria. Because what's a war without Bulgaria?
I've been saying this.
Any questions about the two sides?
We are such bums. We show up in the last 3 months of the war and we're like, yeah, we won it for you guys. You're welcome.
Well, I mean, in one sense, we absolutely did win it. I mean, they would have lost. The French and the British would have lost had the Americans not shown up. So we absolutely pulled their chestnuts
Well, yeah,
out of the fire.
and you know what? We owed France
we did still show up, you know, right at the end and pretend like we were like all
So-
that in a bag of chips.
Did like
Pretend.
the Scandinavian countries never got involved in World War One at all?
I don't believe so. I do know that Iceland was on our side in World War II.
Well,
I don't imagine they had much
Hey, we won!
military assistance.
You think it's a coincidence? Iceland's on our side, we win! Kylie.
Learning, so, this is we talked a little, just that they're committing war crimes in the war.
Yeah, World War I was all about war crimes.
I mean,
There's a lot of them.
World War II
I mean,
was-
a lot of wars are all about what we would consider war crimes. Like,
Well, I mean, we call them war crimes because these are things that happen in war that we
and then
don't
we
want to
decided,
happen.
oh, we didn't feel good about doing that one. Let's maybe avoid that one.
Yeah. And it's like the only people who are charged with war crimes are the people who lose. If you commit a lot of war crimes but you win, you're fine.
Yes, this is true.
we're doing great.
Okay, so basically, Franz Ferdinand is assassinated in late June of 1914, and by August 2nd, the war has started. And Germany has, you guys always have to stop me if you see me reaching up to right up here. Germany has invaded through Belgium. And France and England have sent over armies to stop them. And then, well, I'll get into the course of the war next time. But any questions about that?